Hello everyone, welcome to Joe's Hot Takes 25. This is season 1, episode 21, so this is really cool, episode 21. Pretty excited. This episode, by the way, will be the final chapter in my new book that I'll be putting out, which is called Mic Drop, 21 Takes That Make You Think. And it will be a book made up of the 21 podcasts that we have live on YouTube now. And they are basically the transcripts, the scripts, the podcast scripts that I follow as I'm doing each podcast. And what I've done is converted those into story or book form, so they're more of a book form. Each episode is one chapter, so 21 chapters. So 21 things to think about. If you haven't had a chance to watch the podcasts or listen to the podcasts before I actually started video, jump on the book. We'll get it out here hopefully in the next couple of months, and it'll be a fun read. While I'm on books, I did publish a book. It's called The Cop and Me, and it's really a story about my life, about growing up and in a violent household and making decisions along the way. What am I going to do with my life? Where am I going to go? And it brings me pretty much to where we are today here making podcasts. With them, I got a little background here going on. Joe's Hot Takes 25. There you go. My podcast. And anyway, let's jump into it. We can talk all day about books and fun stuff, but let's talk about some gritty stuff. Let's ask some questions. Let's sprinkle in a little bit of research and some facts, and let's provoke some thoughts. I want each of you to make your own educated decisions on these topics that we talk about. So I just really want to kind of stir the pot, get you thinking, get the juices flowing. I'll give you a little bit to chew on. Today, this is a big podcast. This is a big topic. It is the topic of the U.S. national debt. And what does that mean? And so let's understand it. Some people don't understand the debt. I always thought I understood the national debt, and I always remember hearing people say, well, we don't use the gold standard anymore, so how can we be trillions of dollars in debt and have billions of dollars worth of gold? It doesn't work. So that's an interesting. I guess I didn't realize how do we deal with our debt, and who do we owe the money to? So I don't know. Let's find out. What is national debt? What does it mean for us? Who do we owe money to? All these great questions. So let's explore the facts, ask some of these tough questions. So buckle up, folks. Buckle up. This one goes pretty deep, and it's a heavy subject. So we'll jump into segment number 1, which is, what is the national debt? I don't know. The national debt, it's currently sitting at over, hope you're sitting down for this, because our current debt is sitting at over $36.21 trillion, that's a T, trillion dollars, as of June 5th, 2025. That is $36.21 trillion. That's the total amount the United States government has borrowed over its history. This includes money borrowed to pay for wars, social programs, infrastructure, interest on past debts, and yes, bailouts and stimulus programs as well. That's pretty interesting. So why can't we just catch up? I mean, all of us, we have bills at home. At some point we sit down, we put paper and pencil together, and we figure it out. And we go, okay, look, I need to cut back spending here. I need to try to earn a little more money over here. I need to focus on paying these things down, and pretty soon we find ourselves catching up to our debt and then eventually getting out of our debt. So why can't our federal government do that? I get the numbers are much larger than you and I would deal with. I can't even fathom the number. So that's big. That's big. So we're running a deficit almost every year. In other words, we are spending more money every year than we bring in through taxes. And that difference gets added to the debt. So every year we pay interest on that debt, but that number just keeps getting bigger, 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 bigger. So we're never going to catch up. It's kind of like having a credit card and you put $1,000 on it and you make the minimum payments of 18 or 20 bucks a month at 26% interest. You'll never catch up. You just can't ever pay the card off because the interest is accruing at bigger numbers than what you're making a payment on. Just basic math. Okay, so you might think most of our debt is owed to foreign countries because it seems like that's where it's at. And there is a big chunk that is owed to foreign countries. So let's look at that. As of February 2025, foreign nations hold about $8.8 trillion of our debt. 8.8 trillion. Now remember, I said we were 36.21 trillion in debt. So that's a big chunk, but we got a lot more debt out there than what we owe foreign countries. 8.8 trillion. Here's some of our top debt holders that we owe money to. Japan, a whopping $1.125 trillion. 1.125 trillion we owe Japan. China, we hear a lot about China. We're at $784 billion that we owe China. The United Kingdom, another $750 billion. So almost as much as we're in debt to China, we're in debt to the UK. Then there's like the Cayman Islands and other places where we owe over $400 billion to each. And then continue on with some of the countries like Switzerland, Saudi Arabia, Taiwan. They hold significant amounts too, but really it's about 24% of the debt that's foreign held. That's it, 24%. So the rest, well, that's owed to U.S. entities. All that other money, that other 76% of the money is owed to U.S. entities like the Federal Reserve, Social Security, Trust Fund, individual investors who buy treasury bonds. So that's where that money's owed. So how's the U.S. dollar backed? As a kid, I remember always hearing about we're backed by the gold standard, but we don't do that anymore. We don't back by the gold standard anymore. I never really followed that too much, so I didn't really know what that meant. So this is where it gets a little philosophical, so stay with me on this little ride. Back in the day, the U.S. dollar was backed by gold. That was the gold standard. We talked about Fort Knox back in the day, had all the gold. That ended in 1971 when President Nixon took us off the gold standard. So what backs the dollar now? Well, there's two things that back the dollar: taxes and debt. So taxes. The government collects wealth from the citizens, from all of us, in the form of taxes. Income tax, corporate tax, payroll tax, property tax, sales tax, and all of these contribute to this pool. Then there's the debt. The government borrows from the future by selling treasury bonds, promising to repay later with interest. So there is a market for treasury bonds out there. I know I used to buy a lot of bonds. The catch to the bonds were you could buy, let's say $100. You could buy a $100 bond for $50. So you pay $50. The government gave you a $100 bond, and the day that you got that bond, it was worth probably about $30, even though you paid $50 for it. And then it starts accruing interest, and it keeps growing and growing and growing. Most of these bonds will grow for about 30 years before they'll reach maturity. So if I buy this bond, throw it in my desk, and leave it there for 30 years, then I can get my $100 out of it. But it's not a bad deal. You can invest some money that way. It's a long, slow process, but buy some bonds, throw them in the safe deposit box, or throw them in your safe, and leave them there for 30 years. But there's other bonds. There's other types of bonds as well. Okay, so so the U.S. dollar is essentially backed, this is where it gets the philosophical part, by trust. Trust in the U.S. government's ability to collect taxes and pay back its loans. So it's a trust thing. Oh, and thanks to a strong and stable economy, people around the world still trust our system. The Federal Reserve even holds enough Treasury securities to match the amount of physical cash in circulation. So there is somewhat of a balance there on a very, very much lower end scale. But let's see what happens. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about debt versus trade. Like I said earlier, when we want to get out of debt at home, what do? We reduce our spending, we increase our income, and we get out of debt. So if our national debt is so high, how are we doing in terms of trade? So let's look at some of the recent numbers. This is some research I did. I found that our exports are sitting at about 266.5 billion. So we're selling $266.5 billion in exports, but our imports are at 364.9 billion. So there's a trade deficit, right? There's a trade deficit of $98.4 billion, and that's rising. So again, we're spending more than we're making, and we're just not earning enough. So this is where you see President Trump coming in with some of these tariff ideas. We have to somehow increase our trade and our income to the United States so that we can somehow start paying off or paying down our bill or bills instead of continue to go further and further underwater. So the United States has had a constant trade deficit since 1992. 1992, folks, we've been in trade deficit. That means we buy more from other countries than we sell. Simple. Our trade deficit in 2024, so that was just last year, this was some of the best information I could get at this time. Trade deficit 2024 was a whopping 917.8 billion. So in other words, we are $917.8 billion going the wrong direction. It's what we're putting out over what we're spending, over what we're earning. So we're spending way more than we earn. So let's do a little history behind our dollar, and let's I always like to throw a little history in. So the gold standard was our foundation from about the 1870s to 1971. Then came the area of what they call fiat currency. That's money backed by the government's promise rather than a physical asset. So the idea is that the U.S. economy is so powerful and productive that our money remains valuable. But what happens if people stop believing in that system? Well, then you get a loss of confidence in our economy. Spiraling debt, major geopolitical shifts could cause nations to stop using the dollar as a global reserve currency. It hasn't happened yet, but it is a risk. And, you know, I want to throw this out there. You know, when you're talking about this, the United States of America has always, until recently, has held a AAA credit rating. It's the highest credit rating available, AAA credit rating. We have been knocked down to a AAA1 credit rating, or I'm sorry, a AA1 credit rating. So we've lost our AAA, and we're down to AA, AA plus, AA1, whatever you want to call it. But it's not where it was. That tells me that there is some loss of confidence in our economy and in our dollar. And this is scary because, remember, we're backing it with confidence. We're going to raise money through taxes, okay, and somehow pay our debts, which brings up other questions like, how are we giving away the farm? We can't give away free health care. We can't give away free tuition. We can't put all this money into infrastructure if we don't have it. We don't have the money. So how are you going to pay for this? Just keep adding to that $36 trillion in debt? I guess. Doesn't make any sense to me. But here's the good news. The United States currently leads the world with a GPD. That's what we're putting out, our product, of about 30.5 trillion. So we're putting out about 30.5 trillion out there in our GDP, our gross domestic product. Okay? So if our GPD is so massive, why is our debt still growing? Okay, because we keep running budget deficits. Because remember, we're not paying back enough. We're not putting enough money back into it than what we've already taken out. So we have to borrow money to cover the gap, which means more debt. So spending on Social Security, Medicare, the military, and I've talked about how much money we spend on our military budget and different programs. Often those programs outpace our revenue. And so that's another problem that we have. So interest on debt adds to the pile. And let me tell you, folks, if you've been dealing with credit cards, you understand that you can't get out from under the pile. If you're making a minimum payment on your credit card, you're never going to pay it off. And, you know, the same goes with an automobile. You buy a car for $50,000. You take a 5 or 6 year loan on it at 5 or 6%. Do the math on how much you're going to pay for that automobile at the end of this. So that's kind of where we are, but just as a country, much, much bigger numbers. Numbers we don't even fathom, right? I can't. Again, I can't. So, but events like recessions, the pandemic, these are things that really, really increased our spending and reduced our tax revenue. So that helped us get farther in debt, okay? So the pandemic, that was a big one. It caused a lot of problems for people. So hopefully our government and governments around the world won't allow another pandemic to occur, right? Okay. So, I mean, it's crazy. What do we do, right? How do we fix this? Can we? Can we even fix it? I don't know. Some have proposed ideas like the Department of Government Efficiency. You just saw that with the Trump administration, or DOGE. To trim the waste, right, and improve the operations, right? It's a great idea, right? It's what we have to do. It's what we do at home, right? We reduce our spending, increase our income, and get out of debt. That's what the idea behind DOGE was, and probably still is. It was a short-lived program. It had restraints placed on it, governmentally and legally. So there wasn't a whole lot they could do, but they definitely came in and did some serious cuts and cuts to spending. So, so rising debt, here's the problem. The higher the debt gets, we have higher other things, like our interest rates become higher, right? Because the debt's so high. Our inflation rates get higher. Then there's cuts to social programs. So before you can ask for free tuition or government free health care, keep in mind where are you going to get the money? So we're going to have to cut other programs somewhere. And this really can put a strain on our future generations. And I've talked about this too before, where with a lot of our future generations, one thing that we're seeing is our young people, it seems as though we're not full-time employed like we used to be. So when we're working a couple of part-time jobs, we're putting a lot less money into Social Security. We're paying a lot less money in taxes. We look at different types of tax cuts and ways to save money with our taxes. Here's the thing, and I talk about this a little bit with the big corporations, because people say, well, the big corporations don't pay any taxes. Well, it's partially true. Sometimes, right. There are tax shelters, there's loopholes, there's the same things. These corporations have the same things that we have, right? We have ways to shelter or limit our tax liabilities through deductions. These corporations use those deductions, but keep in mind these corporations are assets to our country. These corporations employ millions of people that give us the opportunity to go buy vehicles, buy a house, put our kids through school, things like that. So these corporations are huge employers. They also pay a lot of taxes, maybe not at the highest federal levels, but you see a lot of tax money being invested into communities where these big corporations are. So they bring in a lot of business. I used to work in Chandler, Arizona. Chandler, Arizona, there are 2 Intel plants. When Intel comes into your community, Intel, one, builds a giant plant, a giant campus to work on, which employs thousands of people in the construction trades. Then they bring their people in to operate. Well, when you're bringing in thousands and thousands of employees, they need a place to live. They're going to need vehicles. They're going to be shopping at the grocery stores, clothing stores, putting their children in school, all of these things, right? So before we start pointing our fingers at the big corporations and saying that there are these big, terrible, powerful entities, we have to really look at what do they provide for us. And they do pay taxes. There's a lot of money that comes in from taxes from the big corporations. So I know that there's been a lot of talk about, let's just tax the big corporations. Let's tax the rich. Tax the snot out of them. Well, when you do that, you're going to cause other problems, but that's a whole nother podcast, right? We're not going to talk about that today. Okay, so what can we do about this deficit and all of this debt? How do we get out of it? Well, here's some options. I did a little research. Well, the first thing is, I'm going to say it starts with a V, right? And it's called vote. First things, vote. Choose candidates who advocate for fiscal responsibility. Find those candidates. Who are the people that are saying we need to cut the spending, we need to increase our output, make more money, and start getting our national debt under control? Those are the people we want to look for, okay? Now, demand transparency. We saw it with Doge. There was a lot of that happening. There was a push for clear government budgets and oversight. So push for this transparency. We need to see these budgets, these governmental budgets. And I got to put this on all of you folks. What you got to do, everyone, is your research. You got to stay curious, right? You got to do your research. Find out what's really happening in our world. Don't look on social media. Don't look on Facebook. Don't look on Instagram or Twitter or X. You're not going to get the right answers. You're going to get whatever people want you to hear. You're going to get the popular vote out there, right? Go do the research. Dig deep. Research it and cross-research it. Don't just do an internet search. I do this. I do internet searches. I try to find information. And then what I try to do is go back periodically and spot check that information. So I'll ask the same questions again and see if I can get the same responses, see if I can find the same articles. Just every once in a while, it's just a way to cross-check and make sure that you're getting at least pretty decent information, okay? So vote, demand transparency, educate. That's what part of this podcast is. Educate others. Share what you learn. Let people know. Let people know. This is what we need to do, folks. We have to find people that'll push for financial responsibility and advocate for it. We need to see these government budgets. When I talk about, go back and watch the podcast on defense spending, and you're talking about hammers that they were paying, and I don't remember the numbers now, $600 for a hammer. I can go to Home Depot and buy a hammer for $25. So why does it cost the government $600, right? So we need to work on this. And, be educated. We have to educate ourselves and then educate others. And then support the oversight and reform. I know it's tough, right? Encourage policies that reduce unnecessary spending. Sometimes it's tough. Sometimes it cuts a little deeper than we want it to, or sometimes it cuts into something that we're passionate about. But we have to look at the bigger picture and the greater good of the whole situation. And a lot of times the greater good of the whole situation is reduce the unnecessary spending, okay? So that we can provide for our futures, for our children, our children's children, because I'm not sure things like Social Security, I hear it all the time. Social Security is not going to be around when I retire. Here's the thing, folks. It's going to be here. It just might not be called Social Security anymore. Who knows? But there are too many people that are too dependent on our government right now. There are too many people. I want to say the number is close to 20%. That's a prior podcast that I put out. Somewhere in the 20% area of the population of the United States of America is receiving some sort of aid or assistance. That's a lot. That's a lot. So 80% of us have to pick up for the other 20%. And that's not even a fair assessment, I don't think. But anyway, hey, I'm rambling now. So let's do some closing thoughts here. Here's what we know. The United States government is in deep debt, and it keeps growing. Even with the world's largest economy, we're falling behind financially. The solution, it starts with us, folks. We need to be engaged, informed, and proactive. So, I asked the questions. I gave you some facts and some research and information. Now it's your turn. What do you think we can do to stop the bleeding? What do you think? Remember, we, the people, have the power. So, stay curious, all right? Stay informed. Always ask questions. Be kind to one another. And until next time, friends, be well. We'll talk to you soon.